Welcome back to the most accurate podcast here at 4for4 Football. As always, I'm your host, John Daigle, on a Monday afternoon for the weekly Waiver Wire preview. As always, the Week 4 Waiver Wire, available at 4for4.com by Monday afternoon, and is available to you using the promo code YouTube, which gets you 25% off for the rest of the year. And if you go to 4for4.com homepage right now, you will see that it is Devon Achane, because that's what he told media he would like to be called for the rest of the season. And he's earned that after he scored 4 touchdowns for the Dolphins. Everyone had success against the Eagles, against the Broncos, I should say, in Miami's backfield. And we don't expect those numbers to carry over weekly. Even third-string running back Chris Brooks had 9 carries for 7.3 yards per carry against Denver. It's what happened so far against the Broncos. But Achane mixed in from the very beginning in the first half, out-carrying Mostert 10-7 in those first 2 quarters and recording 11 touches to Mostert's 13. He eventually finished with 43% of Miami's backfield touches in a game which the Dolphins running backs recorded 51 touches. But what I look at, not the crazy numbers that everyone else is expecting to carry over, but just the fact that he was also creatively schemed his touches. He had 11 carries from shotgun, 3 screens, 2 shovel passes, including 1 no-look right-handed one from Tua inside the 10-yard line, which tells us that Mike McDaniel is trying to keep Achane involved for the rest of the season. Having said that, we can't ignore the fact that Jeff Wilson is expected to return from his finger injury in Week 5. And we know last year, in the 7 games Jeff Wilson and Mostert played together, Mike McDaniel used Wilson over Mostert. Wilson outtouched Mostert 82-80 in those games and is now entering and returning to what we believe will be a 3-headed timeshare. So long term, I am a little more skeptical than most about Achane's involvement when all 3 are healthy. I see Achane as an RB 3 or 4 weekly the rest of the season. But that doesn't mean you have to wait on spending your fab, given that both Mostert and Wilson, who is injured now, haven't stayed healthy for a full season at any point in their careers. And Mostert's been playing since 2015. So if that's the case, I don't mind going up to 50% of fab and thinking that there are multiple paths for Achane to succeed, even if this backfield becomes a 3-headed timeshare. He's also my favorite pickup this week because the wide receivers that are currently available in Yahoo and Sleeper leagues require a ton of nuance before deciding how much fab to spend. Let's start with Tank Dell, because Dell, without Noah Brown the past 2 weeks, who is on injured reserve, has run the second most routes, 83% route participation for the Texans, and earned a team-high 23.6% of their targets in that time. The Texans also quietly have the second easiest schedule of opposing pass defenses from Week 4 on. So we're comfortable flexing or starting Dell as our wide receiver 3 every week moving forward. Having said that, if you're looking for the best immediate option in Week 4, I do think it's Adam Thielen if Jonathan Mingo is ruled out with a concussion. And so far, dating back to last year, concussion protocol usually means you're going to miss the next game. And if that's the case, then we think Adam Thielen can succeed because Bryce Young is expected to miss Week 4 against the Vikings, and the Panthers against the Seahawks on Sunday actually showed life without him. Whereas Young ranked dead last with 4.3 yards per attempt from a clean pocket this year, Andy Dalton completed 67% of his passes for 221 yards, 6.3 yards per attempt, and 2 touchdowns when kept clean. We can't expect him to throw 58 passes weekly, but we do know exactly how Brian Flores and the Vikings are going to play defense against the Panthers, since they've blitzed at a top 2 rate in all 3 games so far this year. For reference, 37 quarterbacks recorded 188 dropbacks last year. And I'm using that as my qualifier just because that's how many dropbacks Brock Purdy had as the quote-unquote backup quarterback in San Francisco. And out of those 37 quarterbacks, Andy Dalton ranked 3rd in yards per attempt with 8.9, 6th in completion rate, and threw 8 touchdowns to 2 interceptions against the blitz. Mingo's concussion also honed in Carolina's 2 wide sets on Sunday because Thielen saw a team-high 24.5% of the team's targets, and he was one of only 2 players, DJ Chark included, who ran a route on 90% of Dalton's dropbacks. So, given that the Vikings have already allowed 4 different receivers to reach 18.5 PPR points against them, Thielen, in my opinion, is a lock for week 4 and the better immediate play over Tank Dell. More nuance involved because the Chargers wide receivers room without Mike Williams is also filled with moving pieces. Josh Palmer is a lock in the short term over Quentin Johnston. We saw after Mike Williams was carted off the field in the 3rd quarter, Justin Herbert recorded 10 dropbacks through overtime. And it was Keenan Allen and Palmer who ran a route on 100% of those dropbacks. Johnston played exclusively from 3 wide sets with a route on 30% of those dropbacks. Long term, however, given that he has first-round capital, I do think Johnston is the pickup and someone I would stash over Palmer if you're not needing a starter in week 4. But in the short term, even the Chargers told us. They gave us evidence of how they're going to deploy their wide receivers, at least in the next couple of weeks, making Palmer the better short-term add if your roster needs a starter immediately. And I wish it was less complicated than that, but unfortunately, we need even more nuance because Marvin Mims is arguably a better addition than everyone I talked about. Although he has less standalone value at this time compared to all the others we mentioned, because Mims, once again, ran the 7th most routes for the Broncos in their 50-point loss against the Dolphins, but turned that into 73 receiving yards and a 99-yard kick return for a touchdown. And what happened around him, with Courtland Sutton fumbling twice and Brandon Johnson canceling out 2 touchdowns for holding penalties, that's equally as important as Mims continuing to thrive on minimal opportunity, because that's how he eventually grows into a larger role. So despite selling you on the wide receivers I talked about earlier, if you ask me who I'd rather have from week 10 on when the Broncos return from their bye, it's Mims over everyone. But that depends entirely on your own roster. Let's get to some deep league notes before we get out of here. We touched on DJ Chark earlier. And if Mingo were presumably going to miss this game, Chark should be flexed in most lineups as well. Not only did he tie for the league lead with 5 targets seen 20 yards deep, that's exactly where Minnesota's opponents have attacked them so far, with the 5th highest rate of targets seen 20 yards downfield. We know Chark is going to get Dalton's targets deep, and we know that's where Minnesota is allowing a high rate of explosive passes. Thus, Chark makes sense as an immediate flex option, and I've seen him available in most high-stakes leagues. I know how desperate you can be in super flex leagues, 12, 14-team league formats. I'm there with you. And with Jimmy Garoppolo in concussion protocol, I genuinely think Aidan O'Connell should be sprinkled on. O'Connell earned Pro Football Focus's highest passing grade for the Raiders during the preseason and averaged a 10.1 yard depth of target in that time, with the 2nd highest completion rate under pressure, only to Gardner Minshew. O'Connell also averaged 7.9 yards per attempt with 3 touchdowns and no picks from a clean pocket. It probably is going to be Brian Hoyer in place of Garoppolo. But 1, we don't know how long the injury is going to linger for Garoppolo, who has a lengthy history of injuries. And 2, we've already seen Brian Hoyer to this point of his career. He was literally benched in his last 2 starts. Thus, we think even if Hoyer were to start for the Raiders immediately, O'Connell is the player who eventually comes in. And given how outstandingly well he played in the preseason, that's where I want to put my money on. $1 to $4 fab will probably do it in deeper superflex leagues before the rest of your league mates find out who he is. Trey Sermon. is also another stash, as ugly as that sounds, because Zach Moss has now handled 100% and 84% of Indy's backfield touches since he returned in week 3. And no one can guarantee Jonathan Taylor returns in week 5 with his supposed injury on the team's PUP list. All we know right now is that the Colts cut Deion Jackson and that Trey Sermon is the only backup available. Thus, if Zach Moss is going to continue handling, as he did this past game, 32 of 38 backfield touches, we need to be ahead of his backup for that workload. And the backup right now is not Jonathan Taylor. We have to take a chance that's Trey Sermon. And finally, given all the injuries happening in Baltimore's backfield, I would imagine Melvin Gordon shows up in week 4 as the team's starting running back. Justice Hill, still injured, and may play as early as week 4. But Gus Edwards suffered a concussion, and Kenyon Drake fumbled the ball on one of his 3 touches. And that's why you saw Melvin Gordon out-touch Kenyon Drake 12-3 and lead the team's backfield in touches entirely, Gus Edwards included, before he was injured. If that's the case, again, for deeper leagues, Melvin Gordon will be the Ravens starter in week 4. Reminder, all the other deep league notes, contingency top 10, and ranked positional plays are available for you on 4for4.com in the waiver wire. And we will be back on Thursday for our weekly preview show at 2 p.m. Eastern. Until then, be a little bit kinder than what's required. We'll see you next time.